When the assassination of John F. Kennedy is discussed, the same question always comes back: conspiracy or a lone act? To answer it seriously, you sometimes have to step away from broad generalities and focus on concrete, measurable, verifiable elements. Today, I want to talk about a physical detail that is too often underestimated: John Connally's jacket, the governor of Texas, seated directly in front of the president in the limousine. My approach is simple: observe, locate, compare, not to win an argument, but to test an explanation against the facts. On the jacket, you can identify a bullet entry point and a bullet exit point. These aren't just words, they're locations. They exist on a piece of clothing and therefore in real space. And you can do something very straightforward: transfer those points onto a right-side profile photo of Connally. That makes it possible to place the strike and the projectile's exit back onto a real body, in a real posture, at the moment the shots ring out. Then comes the decisive element: the Texas hat. During the gunfire, Connally is holding that hat in his right hand, up at chest level. To hold it that way, his right arm has to be bent. The position of his elbow, forearm, and wrist isn't free. It's constrained by his grip, by the hat's height, and by the fact that he doesn't let it go. That's where the visual comparison becomes unforgiving. When you overlay a diagram of a bent arm onto a photo of Connally, you see something very concrete. In that posture, it's impossible for a bullet, after passing through the torso, to strike the outside of the right wrist exactly as it's often presented under the single bullet theory. If the same projectile were to continue on, the alignment would make it exit lower, somewhere else, not at the point observed on the wrist. This isn't a hunch. It's a matter of trajectory and anatomy. When the forearm stays high, close to the chest, the wrist cannot fall onto the line that would, by itself, save the single bullet theory. One bullet supposedly capable of hitting multiple targets while still matching the positions visible on film. Next, look at the Zapruder film. In the 39 frames following the moment JFK is hit in the throat, Connally does not drop his hat. He keeps it in his right hand, which means he does not lower his right forearm down toward the point that would correspond to a bullet exit caused by the same shot that struck the president. His arm remains in a position incompatible with the single bullet scenario that is supposed to explain both the president's wounds and Connally's. From there, one conclusion follows: if you stick to this reconstruction without cheating the posture, another bullet passed through John Connally's wrist from the outside to the inside, and then finished its path in his left thigh. In other words, the wrist and thigh injuries would not be the continuation of a projectile that had already gone through the president. They would correspond to a separate shot, with its own distinct trajectory. And if that shot is distinct, where could it have come from? The configuration suggests a shot from the right and from behind, on a downward angle. That direction points to a specific area within the Dealey Plaza landscape. Among the possibilities, the far west window on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository matches that angle and deserves consideration, not out of preference, but because it fits the geometry implied. And this is where everything changes, because if an additional bullet is required, we're no longer debating a detail, we're debating the total number of shots. A fourth bullet implies a more complex firing sequence than the simplest version of events. And a more complex sequence makes multiple firing positions plausible, meaning coordination. In other words, the conspiracy hypothesis becomes coherent. So, conspiracy or not? I'm not asking you to adopt a belief. I'm asking you to consider a method. Start with a piece of clothing, locate entry and exit, transfer those points onto a photo, reconstruct the arm posture imposed by the hat, and then compare the whole thing to the frames of the film. If, at the end of those steps, the single trajectory no longer holds, the conspiracy question is no longer a slogan, it becomes a consequence. Because if 4 bullets are necessary to explain what we see, the lone shooter thesis wobbles. And when it wobbles, the demand for truth begins. Look, measure, compare, and accept what the facts impose, even when it's unsettling. I state clearly and unequivocally that today, December 10th, 2025, the question of a conspiracy in the assassination of John F. Kennedy is no longer an open question. This assassination was definitively the result of a conspiracy. thanks to Robert Groden's excellent book, JFK, Absolute Proof, which I strongly recommend to anyone who truly wants to dig deeper into the JFK assassination, I've been able to move forward in my work, and I thank him for it. It is notably because of his efforts that the Zapruder film was broadcast on television for the first time in 1975, 12 years after the assassination.